At first, Jane didn't think much of it. A sip of a mysterious elixir, a promise of beauty, and then life went on. But soon, things began to change. Her skin, once dull, started to glow with an almost magical radiance. Her figure, once plain, transformed, her waist slimming, her hips and chest filling out, drawing the attention of everyone around. Chasing perfection. Jane had always been a diligent student. Growing up in a modest household with her hardworking father, a mechanic, and her mother, a teacher, life was never easy, but they made do with what they had. Jane was used to stretching every penny, managing her school fees and living expenses through a part-time job at a local café. Still, she often felt the weight of it all. Between school assignments, her part-time job, and the financial struggles at home, she felt like she could barely catch a breath. Then there was Lillian, her best friend. Lillian came from a different world, a life of luxury. Her family was wealthy, and she had everything she wanted: designer clothes, endless outings, and a carefree lifestyle that Jane could only dream of. Lillian often encouraged Jane to loosen up, to take risks, to enjoy life a little more, but Jane always hesitated. She didn't have the luxury to live carelessly. But over time, she began to feel a strange longing, a yearning for something more, something that would make her feel seen, noticed, and appreciated. Perhaps, just for once, she could experience a little of the luxury Lillian had. That's when Lillian brought up something that would change everything. It was an ordinary Friday afternoon when Lillian suggested they visit a woman named Sandra. According to Lillian, Sandra was a beauty practitioner who specialized in a mysterious elixir that could enhance one's physical appearance. Lillian swore by it, saying it made her feel more confident, more beautiful. She urged Jane to come along, saying that it was harmless and would give her the glow she deserved. At first, Jane was skeptical. She didn't care much for beauty treatments. But Lillian's excitement was contagious, and after some hesitation, Jane agreed. She wasn't sure why, but something inside her was willing to take a chance. Sandra's house was far from the city center, nestled in a quiet area where the noise and rush of daily life seemed to fade away. The house was modest, the garden overgrown with flowers, yet there was a certain charm to it. Inside, the atmosphere was calm and aromatic with the scent of incense and dried herbs hanging in the air. Sandra greeted them warmly, her smile reassuring as she led them to a small sitting area, offering them herbal teas. Sandra poured the golden liquid into a glass. It shimmered in the light, almost glowing. "It's a special blend," she explained. "All natural herbs designed to enhance your body's natural beauty, to give you a radiant glow, to make you feel energized." Jane hesitated but took the glass. The liquid was sweet with a hint of bitterness, and after a few sips, she finished it, setting the glass down. Sandra assured her that it would work quickly, and within a few days, she'd notice a transformation. Lillian was already glowing with excitement, clearly eager to see Jane experience the same results. The two left Sandra's home, and Jane felt no different, but she couldn't deny the odd sense of calm that washed over her. Days passed, and Jane began to notice subtle changes. Her skin, which had always been smooth but dull, now had a healthy, radiant glow. Her friends noticed it first. "You look different, Jane," they said. "You look amazing." Jane brushed off the compliments, thinking it was just the effects of some good rest and perhaps a little less stress. But the changes didn't stop there. Her body began to shift as well. Her waist seemed to shrink, her hips and chest became fuller, and her clothes started to fit more snugly. It felt like her body was changing overnight, and she couldn't quite understand it. At first, Jane was pleased with the attention she received. People were noticing her in a way they never had before. Her friends admired her new figure, and even strangers complimented her appearance. She couldn't help but feel a little more confident, a little more beautiful. It was a feeling she had longed for, but now it seemed to be turning into something she couldn't control. As the changes continued, Jane's skin became more radiant, her face more defined, and her figure more voluptuous. Her clothes no longer fit, and she started buying new outfits that flattered her new shape. Jane even noticed more people approaching her, striking up conversations she never would have had before. She felt special, appreciated, and wanted. But as the days passed, something more alarming began to happen. The changes became more pronounced, more extreme. Her chest, waist, and hips began to swell in ways that couldn't be explained. Her body felt tight, uncomfortable. The transformation was no longer subtle, it was painful. Jane started to feel a constant pressure in her chest and abdomen, as if her body was stretching beyond its limits. The swelling was no longer just on the surface, it hurt. One morning, after trying on several outfits that no longer fit, Jane stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection in horror. Her once flat stomach had ballooned, and her chest and hips were larger than she had ever imagined. It wasn't the shape she had dreamed of, it was a nightmare. She tried to sit, but the discomfort was unbearable. She couldn't breathe easily, and every movement sent sharp pains through her body. Desperate for answers, Jane confided in Lillian. The two of them visited several hospitals, but none of the doctors could provide a clear explanation for what was happening to her. They ran test after test, but the swelling continued. They couldn't pinpoint a cause, and the pain only intensified. Jane's health was deteriorating. Lillian was increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, but she didn't know what to do either. When the situation reached its worst point, Jane's parents were called. Her mother was the first to arrive, her face filled with concern and fear when she saw her daughter's condition. Jane's father, a quiet man, didn't know how to respond. His daughter was in pain, and they had no answers. Together, they took Jane to a specialist hospital, hoping for some clarity. The doctor there was an experienced specialist in unusual cases like Jane's, and after examining her, he confirmed what they feared: the only solution to reverse the changes would be surgery. The procedure would require Jane to travel abroad for specialized care, as the surgery was complex and not available locally. However, the cost of the surgery was astronomical, millions of naira. Her parents' faces fell. They didn't have that kind of money. They could barely afford Jane's tuition, let alone such a costly operation. Determined to save their daughter, Jane's parents began to explore every possible avenue. They turned to family, friends, and even local organizations for help, but nothing seemed to yield the money they so desperately needed. With no clear way to raise such an immense sum, their hopes began to fade. Eventually, Jane's parents considered extreme measures. They thought about selling their house, mortgaging their property, and even borrowing from wealthy friends in a desperate bid to raise the money. Yet despite their best efforts, nothing worked. The money they needed simply wasn't within reach. With no other option, Jane's parents sought out alternative treatments. They turned to various herbalists, hoping that one of them could provide a remedy. One herbalist promised that a special concoction would reduce the swelling. Drink this daily, and you'll see results, the herbalist insisted. Jane followed the regimen for weeks, but her condition only worsened. Another herbalist suggested a series of intense exercises, claiming it would help burn off the effects of the liquid. Jane followed those instructions too, working out harder than she ever had in her life, but nothing changed. The swelling was still there. As days passed, Jane's condition became unbearable. Her body continued to swell, and she could no longer recognize herself in the mirror. Her mother, exhausted from the constant search for a solution, sat beside her daughter, helpless. Jane's face had become puffed up, her figure unrecognizable, and the pain was all-consuming. She couldn't sleep, couldn't walk, couldn't even sit properly. When they contacted Lillian, hoping for support, Jane found that her friend had distanced herself. She no longer returned Jane's calls, and when Jane's parents visited Lillian's house to seek answers, Lillian wasn't there. It felt like she had abandoned Jane at her most vulnerable. The betrayal stung deeply. In the end, Jane's parents continued searching for a solution, but without the money for surgery or a miracle cure, they could only watch as their daughter's condition deteriorated. The beautiful transformation that had once brought Jane joy had turned into a nightmare she couldn't escape. Now, all Jane wanted was to go back to the way things were before she had chased after beauty, before she had allowed herself to be swept up in the promises of something too good to be true. But it was too late. The reality of her situation had become clear. Without surgery, the changes were permanent. And Jane had learned a harsh lesson: the price of vanity was far greater than she had ever imagined. As the swelling continued to worsen, Jane found herself in a desperate situation. Despite her determination to stay strong, the emotional and physical toll was overwhelming. She had once been a student full of potential, eager to pursue her dreams. Now, she was unable to continue her studies, her health a constant source of worry. She was stuck in a limbo where the surgery she so desperately needed was out of reach, and every treatment she tried seemed to fail. Her parents, though supportive and loving, had exhausted their options. The cost of the surgery, which could only be performed abroad, was astronomical, millions of naira that they simply did not have. They had even considered selling their home to raise the money, but that idea had been quickly dismissed. The thought of sacrificing everything for an uncertain outcome was too much to bear. As the months passed, Jane grew more and more disheartened. She could see the strain it was placing on her parents. Her father, who had once been a hardworking mechanic, took on extra jobs to try and pay for the treatments, while her mother, a teacher, spent her evenings searching for any possible solution. But despite their efforts, Jane's condition seemed to worsen. It was during this time that Jane decided to take matters into her own hands. With no financial support for surgery and the future of her education hanging in the balance, she had no choice but to reconsider her options. One evening, as she sat in her room, staring at the mirror once again, Jane made a decision. She would not let her physical condition define her. She could still find a way to rebuild her life, even if it meant taking a different path. Determined to do something about her situation, Jane started researching online. She explored scholarships, part-time jobs, and freelance opportunities. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to do whatever it took. The swelling and discomfort were constant reminders of her struggles, but they also pushed her to keep fighting. Through online platforms, she began offering tutoring services, teaching English and other subjects to students who needed help. The income was modest, but it was enough to cover her basic expenses. She also started saving every little bit she could, cutting back on unnecessary spending and becoming resourceful. Her parents, though concerned about her health, supported her decision to start earning for herself, understanding that it was one of the few ways Jane could regain a sense of control. In the meantime, Jane also began working on a small business idea. She had always been interested in entrepreneurship, and despite the setback in her health, she knew that starting small was still possible. Using her knowledge of online platforms and digital marketing, Jane started selling handmade products, simple jewelry and accessories she crafted herself. It wasn't a huge success, but it allowed her to continue pursuing something meaningful while also building a sense of independence. After a year of hard work, Jane had managed to save a modest amount. Her health was still a challenge, but she had learned to manage the swelling with the help of doctors and alternative treatments. The swelling had not disappeared, but Jane had come to accept her body for what it was, no longer driven by the need for perfection. She realized that the beauty she had once chased, this unattainable, fleeting beauty, was not worth sacrificing her health or happiness for. Eventually, Jane applied for a local scholarship that would allow her to study business management. It wasn't the international university she had once dreamed of, but it was an opportunity that could provide her with the education she needed to build a better future. She was accepted into the program, and while it wasn't the ideal path, it was one she could afford and pursue with the support of her family. Jane's story was no longer one of external beauty and validation. It had transformed into one of resilience, hard work, and personal growth. She may not have been able to reverse the physical changes that had altered her life, but she had found a way to move forward. She learned that success wasn't just about appearances, it was about the strength to face challenges, the willingness to learn, and the determination to build a life that was meaningful. As for Lillian, she never reached out again. Jane had come to terms with the loss of their friendship. She realized that not everyone who enters your life stays, and sometimes, people come and go for a reason. Lillian had been a part of her journey, but she wasn't the one who would be there to help Jane through the tough times. Jane understood that true friends are those who stand by you when things get hard, not when everything is easy and perfect. Years later, Jane graduated from the local university with a degree in business management. She went on to start her own small business, one that was centered around sustainability and empowerment. She never forgot the lessons she had learned from her struggles. She had discovered that real beauty lies in perseverance, in the courage to keep going even when the odds are stacked against you. Her story became one of hope for others who face challenges, whether physical, emotional, or financial. Jane had found a way to reclaim her life, not through external validation, but through her inner strength and determination to make a difference. If you find this story interesting, please subscribe, like, comment, share, and turn on post notification for more interesting stories.